True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. On October 19, 1997, Sally Leydon called her brother Owen down in Sydney. He'd celebrated his birthday the day before, and she wanted to know if their mum Marian, who was on a year-long overseas trip, had gotten in touch to wish him a happy birthday. When he tells her that she didn't, Sally starts to worry. Now, that is not like her mum. She would never miss her son's birthday. Now, she knew that her mum had been in the UK. She'd received a phone call from her back in August. But it was the 90s, and this is back before we were in constant contact via mobile phone or the internet. There was no digital photo trail of her mum sipping tea in the quaint English countryside for her to push back those worrying thoughts. Sally had no idea where her mum was, or even how to get in contact with her. Someone suggested that she check her mum Marian's bank account to see if it was still being used and to maybe find out where. While the bank employee said to her, look, they can't just hand over that kind of information due to privacy reasons, obviously. Something Sally tells them makes them do a bit of a double take. Where did you say your mum was? Travelling overseas, did you say? That's not what I'm seeing, the bank teller tells her. I can see money being taken out, quite large sums of it, in fact, from a branch, they say, in Byron Bay. From that moment on, Sally's search for her mum, Marion Barter, would become the subject of one of the country's most gripping podcasts, the world following along, while Sally learns that her mum was hiding secrets, lots of them. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. Now, you might know the name Marion Barter from the highly successful podcast The Lady Vanishes. Through bank records, witness reports, classified ads, false information, overseas trips, and a less than thorough police investigation, a tangled web of threads started to reveal the secrets of Marion Barter's final known whereabouts. But while their investigation uncovered a lot, it still wasn't able to hand Sally and her family that last piece of the puzzle. Was her mum scammed by someone who knew she was a romantic at heart? Did she actually return to Australia, or was it just her passport that did? And why did she change her name before setting off on that fateful journey? Sally Leydon, Marion's daughter, has been searching for her mum all this time, refusing to let her mum's story fade into a box stashed somewhere in the police archives. Sally's new podcast, The Missing Matter, is hoping to not only uncover the truth about Marion's final resting place, but to help others who are also searching for their missing. Sally joins us now. Sally, thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to know, and I kind of got a sense of this from the ABC TV show You Can't Ask That, when they spoke to relatives of people who had missing family members. It's been, we're coming up on 30 years since your mum went missing, and just wanted to know, does the emotion around searching for a lost loved one, does that ever become any easier to bear? I imagine it to be something like an open wound that never really gets a chance to heal.
I personally think it gets harder as you get older. I think that also has something to do with your age. I was only 24 when my mum went missing. I'm now 52 and I'm a mum myself. So I think that has a part of it. But we refer to the loss of a missing person in our space as ambiguous loss. The ambiguity that comes with not knowing the where, the why, the how, the what happened to your loved one. It plays with your head and it can cause mental health issues and all sorts of crazy, because you can dive in and, sometimes not come back out for a while, and can be quite challenging.
For those listening who maybe aren't aware of your mum Marion's story, although it has been covered quite extensively on the Lady Vanishes podcast, and you've picked that up again with The Missing Matter in your own podcast now, which kind of picks up from where the Coronial Inquest handed down their report. Can you take us back to before your mum went missing? What was life like for you guys as a family? And what was she like before all of this and what you've subsequently learned about her has come to light?
Well, we had an unusual family mix, I would say. My My mum moved to the Gold Coast after getting a really good promotion at a exclusive boys' school up there called the Southport School. So she packed up and moved from New South Wales to Queensland on the Gold Coast in late 1993. I came up and visited her in the June of 1994 and decided that I would move up there with her at that point. And I moved up in the December of that year. My brother was living in Sydney. I was 21. We were 17 months apart. I was the oldest. He was in a relationship that he'd been in for many years. And soon after I moved up, he got engaged. Soon after that, I met my husband, who we've been together for 30 years now. His name's Chris. And yeah, life was pretty boring, to be honest, in comparison to what I am living today. I lived with Mum for a while. I met Chris. I moved out because I got a dog and she wouldn't let me have the dog. And then Chris and I ended up moving in together and we got engaged. And then Mum decided she was going on the trip of a lifetime and we haven't seen her since.
Well, let's talk about her circumstances. So she was single at this point in life. Like, she'd been married and divorced 3 times by that stage. Did you get a feeling from her that she was out looking for love when she was embarking on this overseas adventure, or was she happily single and was she content with where her life had taken her at that point?
Look, I don't think my mum was ever happy being single. She was a woman who loved being in relationships. She was a romantic. She was that person who dreamt of Heathcliff coming over the rolling hills to whisk her away, on the Orient Express, let's say, because that's part of the story. So I feel like there was a few dramas happening for her at her work. She had just won a big award in teaching. She became the best teacher in Queensland in the November of 1996. I think I just saw things start to shift in that new year of 1997. She changed a little bit. She was sad. She was upset. She'd been crying to me. Sounded to me like there was a bit of tall poppy syndrome happening at the school where some of the other teachers didn't like the fact that she'd been nominated for this award and won it. And it was a pretty big award. I mean, Ida Buttrose actually was the presenter at the Netta Awards who gave Mum her award. And my mum loved Ida Buttrose, so she would have just completely loved that. But yeah, I think she was just in a different headspace. So when she told me that she had decided she was going to go on this trip, she was going to go away for a year, and she was going to come back in time for my wedding, which was the following October, I was okay with that. I just thought, you know what, she's not happy where she is. She's great at her job. She's very passionate and loves what she does as a teacher. And I was okay with her going overseas. She was a strong person. She was capable, very smart. So I didn't have any issues about her doing that on her own or going solo. Yeah, but I think she was a person that loved being in a relationship. So, as it turns out, potentially that's why she went overseas.
Well, let's talk about that moment because, and as much as you as a 23-year-old is paying attention to what their mum is doing, I mean, you've got your own life and, when you're in your 20s, you're still a little bit selfish and you're not really in depth in your mum's life at that point. But there's lots of things that you've since found out were actually going on at that time as she's preparing herself to go on this overseas adventure. Can you just talk us through some of the things that were going on that you've now become aware of as she was packing up and getting ready to go?
Yeah, look, some of the things that we've come across are she changed her name and didn't tell any of us that she had done that. And that actually happened the same week as my birthday and Mother's Day in 1997. So I was quite sad to find that out because my mum and I had a very good relationship and I was quite shocked, if anything, to know that she hadn't told me that she had done that. And she'd packed up all her things and put them into a shipping container. And she did say to me, if I decide to stay overseas and teach, I will get you to send the shipping container over to me. And I kick myself every day that I didn't push her to find out where she was storing the shipping container, because we've never found that. So there's lots of little things that have trickled in over the past 28 years that have given me some insight as to potentially how she was feeling. We knew at the time when she sold her house, she sold it really quickly. She sold it in 3 weeks and for $15,000 less than she bought it for only a few years before. And I know $15,000 doesn't sound like much in today's money, but back then the house was $175,000, I think, and she sold it for $160,000 very quickly in 3 weeks. And we've sort of gone back and looked at that, and I've had people like Laura Richards, who's a criminal analyst who used to work for New Scotland Yard, and she's looked at that and the speeding of the timeline of things that have happened. Like, she's changed her name, she's got a new passport, she's got an international driver's license, she's sold her house at a loss, and she quit her job and then goes overseas. So the speed of that is quite worrying and troubling from a criminal perspective as to why she was doing that and wasn't telling anybody what she was doing.
What's interesting too is that when she applied for that passport in her new name, she didn't ask anyone to sign that application to be her witness. That would potentially be someone that you would think she would, because didn't she ask her dentist to sign off on that for her?
She did, yeah. And he was on the stand at the inquest actually and had no recollection of the matter. He also was based in Brisbane. She lived on the Gold Coast. So there was just a few of those weird scenarios that we sort of looked at and went, why did she do that? And we still don't know, obviously, because she's not here to tell us. But we can make assumptions based on activities and information that we've garnered throughout the process of looking for her.
Well, she does go overseas, and it's not like she disappeared into the ether. She's still in regular contact with you. She's sending postcards, letters, and then she makes a final phone call to you. It's August 1, 1997. This is the last time you speak to your mum. What do you remember from that conversation, and is that something that you replay to yourself? I imagine if I was in your situation, that would be something that I would replay in my head over and over and over to see if I missed something, perhaps.
And this is where it becomes tricky, and this was a topic of conversation throughout the inquest, that when Mum spoke to me on the phone, she wasn't missing. So I wasn't jotting down all the information or writing down how long we spoke for or the information. I had to go off my memory of what we were talking about, and I remember it as clear as day. Thankfully, I'm blessed to be able to do that, I guess. But the phone call was, I remember, because there's timelines, and I think this is how my brain processes the things, because obviously it's a very long time ago and a lot has happened over that time. But I go back through and I timestamp situations. So the Threadboat disaster, for example, we have a timestamp on that. That happened and occurred at 11:40 p.m. on the 30th of July. 1997. My husband and I were driving back. We'd been skiing at Perisher, and when we got home, there was an answering machine message bleeping, like I don't know if you remember the answering machine.
Oh yeah, I remember. There'd be a light flashing, so you knew
so
someone had called.
We walked in, the light's flashing, I press it, and it's Mum. And she's like, oh, I just heard word over here about the Threadboat disaster. I just was checking in to see if you and Chris were okay. And I remember feeling really heartbroken that I'd missed her, because that was the first time she'd called since she'd been away. She left on the 22nd of June, just to give everyone a bit of a timeline, so we're about 6 weeks in. And I had just bought my wedding dress in Sydney on the way back from skiing. And her passport came back in on the 2nd of August. So if we look at the timeline there, we know for a fact that she'd heard about the Threadboat disaster, and she being potentially in the UK is what we assume. She's a day behind us as well. So we've got a very narrow window here of her ringing, her checking in on Chris and I. And I think that's important to mention, because she does fly back in the next day. And I guess from my perspective, why would she take the time to ring me and check in and make sure I'm okay if she never wanted to see me ever again, which is what I was told by police. So, the phone call, she was at a payphone. the money kept dropping out and the phone would hang up and she'd ring me back again. And I was getting quite stressed at that because I guess I didn't have any control over that conversation. She'd just chat, and she'd written me this long letter. It's written on note paper from a hotel in Japan, which is important to the story, and thankfully I kept it. But it's about 9 pages of a little notepad that you get next to your bed. So front and back she's written. And that letter is kind of like a bit of a checklist for me. Have you done this? Have you done that? Could you do this? Because she was in such a rush when she was leaving. And the phone call mimicked that. Okay, you got my letter. Did you do this? Did you do that? So it was a bit of a checklist. And then after about the 3rd or 4th time of the money dropping out, she says to me, this is the last money I have, so I'm just going to let you talk until the money drops out. And so at that point, I told her what was going on in our lives and that I just bought my wedding dress, and the phone cut out. And that was the last time I ever spoke to her.
So as you mentioned, you know that her passport arrives back in the country a day later, and we presume that your mum, Marion, is the one who's using that passport. But how long does it take you to start to worry? Because you don't know at the time that her passport's returned to Australia. You don't know, as you said, that your mum is technically then missing. So how long does it take you to really understand, and when does it start to set in? Like, you know, when someone is missing, you think, okay, maybe they're this, and you maybe think about all the theories about potentially where they might be. Plus she's travelling. It's the 90s. It's not like she had a mobile phone with her. You know, she's using payphones. You're relying on answering machines. So how long does it take you to realise that something's amiss?
So in the phone call, she'd said to me, look, I'm going to stop writing postcards to everybody. And I literally mean everybody got a postcard. Some people kept it, thankfully. Most didn't, unfortunately. But they have been like little droppings for us to be able to actually timestamp where she was and what she was doing at the time, because she does talk about that in these postcards. And she said to me, look, I'm going to stop writing postcards because I want to try and have a holiday. And I said, absolutely, go and have a holiday. Stop buying stamps and finding post boxes and putting mail to us. We're all fine here. You just go and have a break, because I knew she needed to do that. So there was an expectation that I wasn't going to hear from her for a little while. And so I wasn't worried. I was happy that she was having a break. And then, look, I pull myself back. It's hard to remember the timeline here because it's a bit fuzzy, but there was a time when it started to worry me that I realised I actually have no way of contacting her. And in today's world, that's very hard to fathom because we're all so contactable. But back then, it was near impossible. We were relying on dial-up for the internet. As you said, we didn't have mobile phones. Well, some people did, but you were pretty well off if you had a mobile phone back then. Mm-hmm. And it was so new. Technology was new. She didn't have a laptop. So I was really relying on her to either ring me or send me a letter in the way of contacting, as you did back in the 90s. And it sort of just dawned on me that I have no way of contacting her. I didn't know where she was staying. I didn't know what hotel she was at. I didn't know where she was going because she didn't write any of that down. She didn't give me an itinerary or anything for me to be informed or have information of that. I don't even know if she knew herself, to be honest. And then it started getting long in the tooth, and I was like, well, I'm actually starting to get concerned now. Why is she not ringing me? What's happened? And then my brother's birthday was approaching in the October, and I thought for sure she'll call Owen. That'll definitely be the next point of contact if she doesn't send us postcards or letters in the interim. And I rang Owen. His birthday was on a Saturday that year, on the 18th of October, and I said, did you hear from Mum? And he said no. And I was worried at that point. And then I rang him back the next day on the Sunday, and I said, have you heard from her? Because giving her some grace that they're a day behind over there and maybe she'd just got her dates wrong. And he said, no, I didn't hear from her. And I just knew something was wrong at that point. We had a friend come over for dinner and we were talking about it at the dinner table, and she said to me, why don't you ring the bank and see if she's using her account? And so I jumped up straight away while we're eating dinner and I rang. The phone was on the wall next to the dining room table, actually, in the kitchen. And so my friend and Chris, my husband, were sitting there when I rang telebanking, and I said, look, my mum's travelling overseas by herself. She's 51. She hasn't contacted my brother for his birthday, and that's very out of character. Can you please check if she's using her bank account? And she said, I'm really sorry, I can't tell you anything due to privacy. And she paused at that point and said, hang on, did you say your mum's overseas? And I said, yes. And she went, oh my God, there's money coming out of her bank account in Byron Bay, and proceeded to tell me that $5,000 had been withdrawn out of her bank account for multiple days, somewhere in the mix of 3.5 weeks. She also tells me that she was back up in Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast, which is 5 minutes from where I lived. So 3 days money was coming out of her bank account there as well, and then back down in Byron Bay. Now, Mum had left her car with me before she left. She'd sold her house, so she had nowhere to live and no transport. So we know for a fact that she used her Medicare card, or her Medicare card was used in Grafton on the 13th of August. So only, 11 days, 12 days after she's returned. So how did she get to Grafton to use her Medicare card at an optometrist, and then back in Byron Bay taking out $5,000 every day, then back up into Burleigh Heads, then back down to Byron? And back in 1997, it took hours to get to Byron Bay because it was, a very hard road. It wasn't like the freeway that it is today. So there's lots of questions about that, like how did she maneuver herself, and why was she taking out large lumps of money every day instead of just taking out a lump sum? If I can add at this point, on the 15th of October 1997, we now know that $80,000 was electronically transferred out of my mum's bank account to an unknown bank account. So if you add all of that up, that's quite a big chunk of money. In today's money, probably close to $700,000.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with Sally Leydon, the daughter of Marion Barter, an Australian school teacher who vanished back in 1997 and has never been seen since. Up next, Sally reveals the explanation police gave her about her mother's disappearance, a story that was not only misleading, but completely incorrect. So you have the feeling something's wrong. You're starting to find evidence that something is definitely wrong. So you are taking this to police at this stage. And this is a thread that runs through this story quite significantly, in whether it's inaction from the New South Wales Police, whether it's you being told that you can't access things due to privacy reasons. But I'd like you to give me some idea of, and this is a complex one because it's not just New South Wales Police, it's Queensland Police, and it's a lot of agencies working sort of sometimes side by side, sometimes independently to try and find your mum. But can you give us an idea of how the police investigation into your mum's disappearance has been handled from those very beginning stages through to the inquest? And this is 30 years worth of information, so I understand it's a lot. But how do you feel police have handled this?
Well, not very well, if I can just put it out there straight off the cuff. The situation was, after finding out that money was coming out of Mum's bank account, Chris and I went straight down to Byron Bay and took one of Mum's photos and walked around the streets, went to the bank. And the guy at the bank had a very unusual manner. He shook the photo and asked me, we actually shook the photo and said, that rings a bell, and then walked into an office behind him and came out, closed the door behind him, came out, took a photocopy of it at the photocopier, and walked over to me and said, what would you like me to say to her if I see her? And I just panicked. I was like, something is very wrong here. What is going on? So we beelined it around to Byron Bay Police Station. And this is where it all gets a bit messy. They didn't take a formal statement from me or sit me down. I stood at the counter, is my recollection, and he just took down notes in his notebook. And 10 days-ish later, I got a phone call from a man who I believe was the same guy who I spoke to at the police station, telling me that they'd located my mum and that she didn't want anyone to know where she is or what she's doing. I went back and told my grandfather this information, and he said, well, I'm not satisfied with that. And he approached the Salvation Army Missing Persons Unit here in Queensland, and he started to work with them, and that's where Queensland Police came into the mix. is my understanding. And Queensland Police also have said, and the Salvation Army told my grandfather in a letter, which I have, that they had spoken to bank security, and bank security are like the police, and they confirmed that it was your daughter Marion who came into the bank and spoke to a bank teller that she wanted to start a new life and withdrew the balance of her bank account. So I have that in writing from missing persons through the Salvation Army. It's come about at the inquest that Queensland Police confirmed that, and the Salvation Army, the lady actually who was working with my grandfather, who is now very elderly, came onto the stand, couldn't remember it, but it's her name on the letter. So she was like, well, obviously I wrote it because it's my name, but said that sometimes it can be scribed by somebody else and her just sign off on it at the time. And Queensland Police and New South Wales Police, through the inquest, both confirmed that they'd never spoken to or cited my mum.
That must have been heartbreaking to be told that at the time for both you and your brother, because you've had a very close relationship with your mum up to that point and you're worried about her. What was that like to hear that she potentially didn't want to have anything to do with you? That must have killed you guys.
Funny that you say that. My brother ended up taking his own life. He had a different experience with me. The story gets a bit long in the tooth here, but in short, my mum remarried and my stepfather, and he didn't get along very well with Owen, my brother, and it was a decision that Owen would go and live with my dad. Boys being boys, my dad was in the Army Reserve, he played on motorbikes and, probably had a better life for Owen really than what we had living with my stepfather where he didn't get along with. And so for Owen, I feel like he had abandonment issues from a young age with that happening in hindsight. And I do believe Mum thought she was doing the right thing. She was trying to keep everybody happy and balance the balls rather than having another divorced marriage and a broken family. So I think she was just trying to manage it the best way she knew. I personally don't think that was a good decision, but, you can't go back and change time. But for Owen, hearing that they'd found her and that she didn't want anything to do with us again absolutely crushed him. And a few years later, he took his own life, which absolutely devastated me. As I said before, we were only 17 months apart, so we were very close growing up, and completely ripped my heart out of my chest when he died, very unnecessarily. And so to hear that those words that were spoken to us, and if we just stop for a second, I've been really thinking about this a lot as in my world that I am in right now, the same age my mum was when she went missing, as opposed to my 23, 24-year-old self. I'm actually devastated that the delivery of those messages to us was so heartless and careless. And I still haven't even had an apology from anybody for that. The woman who came on the stand from Queensland Police, her comment at the inquest was, oh, yeah, we like to clean them up quick, referring to cleaning up cases and getting them ticked off the box so that they can file it. Oh, yeah, we've done it. We clean them up quick. And my mouth dropped on the floor when she said that. I thought, how disgusting. What a disgraceful term to use when you're talking about a missing persons case. And that woman is still missing today. Absolutely heartbreaking.
This is something you talk about quite a bit, especially in your new podcast, is how much you and the people around you have been re-traumatized over and over through this experience. And I think the thing that I felt myself so wound up as you were talking about how difficult it was for you to get your mum's death certificate after the inquest report decided that she was most probably deceased at this stage. And just the red tape and the difficulty you have dealing with government departments and with businesses like banks and all of that is just traumatizing you guys over and over and over again, because it's not an easy thing. And I guess, as you say in these podcasts, there's reasons why these things are in place, because no one wants to have their identity stolen and things taken. But for you, you essentially have to go in fighting every single time you try and access your mum's super, access the money that was left over in her bank accounts, try and tie up all those loose ends to finish it all. Is there an end to the retraumatization as you continue on this journey when you still don't have an answer?
I refer to it as trauma on repeat. The doors that have been shut in my face have just been astounding. And I think being so open and honest about my experience in the podcast allows people an opportunity to learn. And I'm hoping that departments and government departments and people who work in those areas listen to what I'm saying and actually try and make a difference, even if it's just the tone that they use when they're talking to somebody who has a missing person. You know, I make reference to one part of the journey where I ring archives, National Archives here in Queensland, and said, my mum's a missing person. She changed her name in 1997. I'm just wondering if you could tell me the correct spelling. That was all I was after. It's an unusual name, Ramakel, and I just wasn't sure if I was spelling it the right way. And I didn't have any documentation at that moment because everything was like locked down from me. I was getting blank, big black pages in briefs of evidence and freedom of information that they blocked out from me seeing. So she said, no, can't tell you. And I said, okay, well, due to privacy. And I said, okay, well, when is the presumption of death come into play with a missing person? Because she's obviously not going to be alive forever, even if she thinks she's alive now still. When does that come into play? Oh, it won't. It's got a 100-year lock on it. I said, so you're telling me that even after I pass away, my children won't be able to access that information about how her name was spelt when she changed her name? That's correct. I then rang back sometime later. I can't remember exactly how many weeks, months it was. And I just removed the word missing. Hi, my mum changed her name in 1997. I'm just wondering if you can give me the spelling. And the woman told me everything. The date, where, how, why, etc. Well, not why. She didn't tell me the why. That was something we wanted to get.
That would have been incredible, yes.
And it's not on there, unfortunately, because there was a lot of talk about this when we found this information. And there was supposedly a witness that you have to give a reason why you're changing your name, and that is actually not on the document. So, yeah, it's definitely been challenging. And mum changing her name has definitely put many forks in the road for me. It's been very challenging.
Can you tell us a little bit about the connection to conman Rick Blum and how he came into the story as you're researching what's happened to your mum? Because you've been picking up every tiny trail, whether it's a bank statement, whether it's a Medicare statement, whether it's a witness sighting. There's all these threads that you're trying to pull together. How does Rick Blum come into this conversation?
Well, when we started The Lady Vanishes, we launched the podcast on the 1st of April in 2019. And around May, middle of May, 10th of May, somewhere around there, we were contacted by a lady called Joni Kondos. And she herself had a missing person in her family, and they had done a lot of research and used a lot of things like Trove and archives to be able to find her husband's great-grandmother, which they did after 15 years. And so she was listening to the podcast. She tells me today that for the first time, she's a true crime podcaster. She's been listening for 20-odd years religiously to podcasts. And she said, interestingly, it's the first time I'd ever heard someone ask for help from the public. And she said, so I just thought to myself, why don't I sit? She was sick. She stayed up till midnight. She was just playing around on her computer, and she was running the name Ramakel, which is the name that Mum had changed her name to, through all these search engines that she had come across and started to play with in her own case. And she stumbled across an ad in a newspaper called Le Courrier Australien. It's a newspaper that ran out of Sydney, and it's a French-speaking newspaper. In the newspaper, there is an advertisement that says a M.F. Ramakel and gives how old he is at that time. So this ad was placed in around the late end of 1994. And It talks about him being a polyglot, so speaking multiple languages, good looking, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, looking for a relationship, potential marriage. And there's a PO box connected to the ad for people to connect with this person. And the PO box is based in Lennox Heads. So for those of you who aren't geographically in touch with that, Lennox is the next suburb to Byron Bay. There was a phone number as well, and our brain started to go a million miles an hour. So the only two connectors we had in the entire of Australia was with the name Ramakel was my mum and this ad in the paper. That was it. So we went on this mad search trying to find out who this MF Ramakel is. Turns out the M stands for Monsieur and the F stands for Fernand. We find Fernand Ramakel and we go and knock on his door in Luxembourg. The irony and the connector there is that Mum had written on her outgoing passenger card that she was moving to Luxembourg. So again, heads are spinning. We're like, what is going on? We approach Fernand after a very crazy few days with Channel 7 back in May of 2019. And he gives us a very cold reception. He accuses me of being a gypsy, knocking on his door, asking if he knew who my mum was. And it was very confronting for me. I was very nervous and didn't know what to expect or who I was talking to. And at that point, I thought, this guy obviously has some connection to my mum potentially. And turns out, fast forward, we find the phone number connector. So the police hadn't been able to do that. We'd given all the information to them. They'd come back and said Telstra have no records. They couldn't go back far enough to 1994 to see who owned that phone number or what that phone number was connected to. And we'd spoken about this on the podcast. And I had a gentleman who lives down in that neck of the woods who emailed me and said, look, I'm just, retiree. I've gone down to the local library. I've hand scanned thousands of images of the phone numbers to see if I can find a connection. And I think I found it. And so he had been able to identify that the phone number was linked to a business name called Ballina Coin Invest. And the owner of that company was a guy called Frederick de Hevedere and his wife. So that started the ball rolling. We then did a huge amount of work. Joni in particular dug very deep and started looking into coins. And, you can imagine what we had to do. It wasn't an easy task, but in talking to people in the coin world, we were able to identify that Frederick de Hevedere and Mr. Rick Blum are the same person.
So who is Rick? And how do you see his story intercepting with Marian's?
Mr. Blum or Bloom, if you are, it's spelt Blum, so Blum. But over in Luxembourg and Belgium, it's actually pronounced as Bloom, just for the record. He currently is still living in northern New South Wales. He just had his birthday last week, actually. I think he's now 85, 86 years of age. He was a person who was on the stand, I think, 13 days at my mum's inquest. And in the initial contact police made with Mr. Blum about my mum, he denied knowing her. And then he went home and he called them back the next day and said, actually, I do know her and I had an affair with her, but I didn't want to say anything in front of my wife. And that's where it all started. He has admitted to having an affair with my mum at the same time that she was selling her house. So he makes reference to going to her home and seeing a for sale sign out the front. His passport leaves the country on the Tuesday before my mum flew out of the country. So my mum waited until the term finished on the Friday, which was the 20th of June, 1997, and she flew out on the Sunday, the 22nd. Mr. Bloom flew on Japan Airlines to Japan, and he was asked at the inquest, where did you stay when you went to Japan? And he said, I always stay at Hotel Nikko in Narita. And very quick off the mark, like no question, no hesitation. The paper that Mum wrote to me on in that letter I talked about before and the matching envelope came from Hotel Nico in Narita. So you can imagine me, I was falling off my chair many times with the connectors, and be them coincidences or whatever people want to refer to them as. It's quite daunting for me to sit there and see these happening. When Mum came back into the country on the 2nd of August, Mr. Blum flew in 2 days before. So their timeline overseas is pretty much on par. And there's still investigation that Joni and I are working very hard on and pushing for authorities to help us with regards to getting more information that we know exists that we've been previously told doesn't exist. But going there ourselves, which is what we've done and what we talk about in the Missing Matter podcast, and we go through our journey overseas in finding this information, is now, where we're at and what we're pushing for more information to be sourced through that knowledge that we now have.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the discoveries you have made in making this new podcast? Because you've followed some pretty interesting trails for this one. I mean, you talk openly about the fact that you've taken advice from psychics and as well as witnesses. Like, there are so many threads that you are following down. You've done searches with cadaver dogs in places that Crime Stopper phone calls originated from. Like, what have you discovered? And have you made any progress in finding out any more about where Marian ended up?
Well, you might have to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, we can't give away everything here today, obviously.
Any spoilers, but look, we connected with some of the women who gave evidence at the inquest, who tell the court that they had relationships with Rick Blum and their stories behind that. There's been some sadness happen. We've lost a couple of them in this journey, which has been really devastating, and particularly those that I've become quite close to. And everyone's getting old, and quite frankly, I'm losing my patience, I guess, with why action is still not being taken with firm evidence and firm information that we have and have presented to New South Wales Police and to the AFP. I just don't see the action happening at a speed that it should take. I mean, I waited for 22 years before my mum was even recognised as a missing person by New South Wales Police and put on the national database. I only, just had my DNA uploaded onto the system because I found out that the DNA sample I gave them back in 2010 was a voluntary sample, and they can't actually upload a voluntary sample to any database. And then I didn't sign anything. They just tell me that they have done it. I have nothing in writing. They only ever verbally tell me. So it's all that sort of thing that, really is troubling for the person living with a missing person and that person who's the next of kin, who's trying desperately to get the answers. I haven't made a lot of friends in this space in pushing envelopes and pushing buttons, but, it gets to the point where, how much longer do I have to do this for before people do start to pass away and we lose more evidence after waiting that long already? We're at this juncture and, action needs to be yesterday.
Next, what the inquest found about Marian's disappearance and what they think happened to her. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the inquest into your mum's disappearance does finally conclude that she has likely passed away. Does that change anything for you? I mean, other than physically getting a death certificate, which is a nightmare in itself, being able to do all of those things, like, does it change anything for you emotionally when that decision is handed down?
It's a very challenging time of life, I'm going to be honest, because I have always felt in my heart that my mum wasn't alive. I couldn't fathom that she wouldn't come to my wedding, that she wouldn't come to see her grandchildren, she wouldn't be at Owen's funeral. Like, there were some massive things, like both her parents have passed away. I just don't believe, and I haven't believed for quite a long time. I had hope that she was alive and well, like they'd told me, but the more and more I kept digging, the more and more I just was like, my gut feeling was something is not right. So to hear the coroner say what I thought was quite cathartic. Like I feel like I needed to hear it. It needed to happen, and it allowed me to move on. But I'm in such a world now where my emotions about my mum, I kind of have to put them to the side to be able to do this. Otherwise, I'd be a babbling mess, I think. So I'm more about being a daughter who's looking for her mum from an investigative point of view and someone who's emotionally invested in getting the information and getting the truth and seeking justice and making sure my mum's not forgotten more than I am about the emotional side of my mum being deceased. In saying that, allowing me a death certificate has meant that I can go through the process that people go through when someone passes away. I'd like to mention at this point that when, or you might remember, I just said about the Salvation Army wrote in a letter to my grandfather that my mum withdrew the balance of her bank account. She still had money sitting in her bank account. And the kicker was the Commonwealth Bank were continuing to take the monthly fee from her bank account for 27 years. The guy who came on at the inquest as a representative to Commonwealth Bank, he recognised that and he had the charges reversed. But just those sorts of little things, there's just very lack of, and in the world of the missing, and people not really helping. If you don't have a death certificate, I know of other cases and people who I now would call my friends in this space, whereby, let's say, a husband goes missing and the police declare that he's actually just left. He hasn't actually, so same thing as my mum. They just said, oh, well, she clearly doesn't want anything to do with you guys. And so she's left on her own account and her privacy matters is what they kept telling me. And in the instance of this scenario, the husband goes missing. They don't list him as a missing person. They don't go to inquest for a decade, and therefore there's no death certificate. And his wife can't even sell their home because there's no death certificate. So, you know, in the situation, like for a long-term missing person, you're regarded long-term missing if you're missing longer than 3 months. And I think there needs to be more in place. There's a thing called a P79B form, which police are supposed to send to the coroner after 12 months of a person going missing if they haven't been seen nor cited. And I can see in police records where the coroner's court are requesting that information from New South Wales Police on repeat, and it's just getting denied. They're not responding, they're not replying. That P79B form did not get done until I went public and did a podcast. So shouldn't be up to the family, really, should it, to be pushing the envelope to get these things done when they're policy and procedures that need to be followed.
It's so hard to listen to the stonewalling that's happened to you and the brick walls you find yourself up against and understand how you can keep going, like to hit them so many times and then just keep going. What motivates you this far down the track? Is it just the thought of your mum in the back of your head and just wanting to make sure that her story doesn't just get forgotten? What is it that motivates you now?
It's been hard for me to process that, actually. I get asked that a lot when I'm talking to people, and I don't really know why I keep driving myself, because it does drive me crazy. But I think it's just me as a person. I'm very driven. I don't take no for an answer. I want to make sure that the job is getting done properly and the answers are found. But at the same time, the emotional side of me, I'm worried that if I stop, my mum will be forgotten again. My mum was a taboo subject for a very long time. My grandmother didn't talk to me about it. Her sisters didn't want to talk about it. Owen had died. My dad, I don't talk to my dad about my mum. They got divorced when I was 7. So I really had no one to talk to about it other than my husband and my kids. And, I didn't want to burden them with the upset and the challenge that it is to have a missing person. I didn't have connections with anybody in the missing person world. I didn't have friends and family of missing persons contact me and say, hey, Sally, we'd like to offer you some support or some care, because my mum wasn't known to be a missing person. So therefore, my mum's case essentially fell off the Richter scale, and I was left to sort of muddle along in my own world, having a Facebook page with less than 1,000 followers saying, please help me, someone knows something. And it wasn't until we launched The Lady Vanishes and you have a big media network behind you that actually can put it on the news at night time. We're going into the Australian newspaper on the weekly. That's how we got to where I am today, where people sat up and took notice and went, actually, Marion is missing. And the coroner deeming that, yes, there's a problem here. We need to have an inquest and go to Inquest. And, you know, the inquest, they told me, it was an unprecedented amount of days. And, you know, they've had to put it back with the unsolved homicide team. And, you know, I asked Gary Jubelin when I was talking to him on his podcast, I Catch Killers, recently, and I said, look, in layman's terms, what does that mean for me, in your opinion? If they're putting it with the unsolved homicide as opposed to going back to missing persons unit, what does that tell you? Is she regarded as being murdered or foul play? And he said, yes, that's where it would sit. So it would be an indication that the coroner believes there's more work to be done. So she places it back with unsolved homicide to do the work on that. Now, unsolved homicide told me at the findings before we walked in and heard her findings that they have 800 cases and they need to prioritise, that my mum's case is open but inactive. After everything we've found and everything we've presented, that's what they told me. And it just made me, that was probably one of the hardest things I've had anyone tell me, because I just felt like all the wind was taken out of my sails. After everything I've done and everything I've put myself through emotionally, I'm on heart medication now because my resting heart rate was getting up to 190 beats a minute. Lying on a bed, having an angiogram at the doctors, and they're like, hang on, I think the machine's broken. No, that's just my resting heart rate, because I've just been reading inquest findings and documents and what people are saying about me, and, you know, why am I doing this and what for, and mum's sisters sitting there saying untruths about my relationship with my mum, and absolutely heartbreaking, you know. And at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be antagonistic or trying to cause any problems for anyone. I'm happy to work with anyone that wants to work with me to help me find my mum. And the flip side of that is, by doing what I'm doing, I have met some amazing people who also find themselves in the same situation that I'm in. And if I can help bring awareness to this space by doing what I'm doing, in turn helping others that also are experiencing missing persons, or God forbid, anybody who finds themselves in the same position as I did, that they can learn from some of the things that have happened. And hopefully, you know I've even spoken to the top people in the police force in missing persons who have actually said to me that there has been change in those departments, particularly in the missing persons department, because of what I did and what I said and what I shared with my experiences. You know, I had Glenn Brown, who was the head of missing persons unit at the time, said, it's because of you that some of these changes have been brought about and awareness has come about. So that's not to pat myself on the back. I just want things to be better, not just for me, but for everybody who finds himself in this situation.
I guess I just wanted to end on this, in that this is such a weird conversation to have, because The Lady Vanishes and your story is such a big part of Australia's true crime scene now.
Mm.
And that brings with it what that, community of people brings with it, which for you has been a whole bunch of people who have also been super sleuths for you, who have found things for you. But it also means people are so intrinsically invested in the outcome of this. And I know when the Lady Vanishes podcast wrapped up, without finding Marian, there was a real sense of loss for everyone who followed that journey.
Mm.
I just wanted to know from you how you feel about the fact that you share that sense of unfinished business with so many people now alongside you and who desperately want you to get the answers that we've all been following your journey through to hopefully reach one day.
It was difficult. It was a very difficult moment in time for me when The Lady Vanishes wrapped up as well, because I kind of felt like I was out on an island by myself at that point. I just had the coroner tell me my mum is officially deceased and that she died on the 15th or on or around the 15th of October 1997. And for me to pull myself back to that moment and go, I went into the police station that week. So if you think about Owen's birthday is the 18th of October, that's 3 days later, and I've gone to them and said something's wrong. So within that week, there was knowledge, and they wrote it in their files that $80,000 had been transferred out of my mum's bank account. I get told she's deceased. I get told that it's not going to the DPP, that the homicide have 800 cases they need to prioritise, and that my mum's case essentially wasn't the priority in that moment. The Lady Vanishes ends, and that for me was very difficult because I feel like talking about my story is my coping mechanism at the same time. My brother didn't talk about it and he took his own life. I'm chalk and cheese with my brother. I am the extrovert who needs to talk things through. So for me, talking about it and keeping mum's story alive is somewhat my mental health coping mechanism at the same time. So we had decided, Joni and I had decided we were going to go on this journey overseas to find the answers that we knew were sitting there, but police hadn't gone overseas to find that information. And some of them were sitting behind closed doors, and it was a case of, boots on the ground and having to be there in person to actually explain the situation to find the answers. And we ended up doing 4 live shows as a fundraiser to try and raise some funds for us to go over and do this journey. We had 2 sellout shows in Brisbane, one in Sydney and one on the Gold Coast, and very humbling experience for me. All these beautiful people coming who'd been following my journey, who wanted to come and meet me, give me a hug and just wish me well in finding the information. And then fast forward to October, we go and do the journey and we come back, and then all these people are like, when are you going to tell us what you found? When are you going to tell us what you found? And so in my head, I was like, I don't even know if I have the energy or the drive to tell everyone. Like it was so exhausting, and 2024 was probably the worst year of my life, to be honest. There was just so many hurdles, so many roadblocks, people dying, the inquest. It was just a lot for me, doing cadaver dog searches, looking for my mum's body in creeks. No one should really have to do that, in my opinion. But I decided that potentially we could put together a podcast and share with everybody what we found, and that's how essentially the Missing Matter was born. I'd been using the Missing Matter hashtag for a long time because in my world, it's not just about my mum anymore. It's the missing. They all matter. So we shouldn't forget them, and we need to talk about it and keep it in there because someone knows something in every case. So that's kind of how it was born. And, I was very grateful for Joni, who's come along with me on this ride. We do the podcast together. And, moving forward, October this year will be my mum's 80th birthday, or what would have been her 80th birthday. And I haven't had a chance to mourn her or have a memorial for her or do anything special to celebrate her over the years. I was planning to do something for her 75th, actually, and then COVID hit and it all got messy. And so I've just waited. I thought her 80th birthday is sort of seemingly quite fitting. I've done the podcast. We're still working on it, and we've decided to have a high tea for her, which is a paid or a ticketed event, which we're hosting here in Brisbane. There's only 100 tickets, so it's not a big event, and tickets will go on sale at the end of July for that. And the money raised, there won't be a lot of money after everything that it costs to host one of these things, but I'm hoping that we can raise a few funds from some raffles and some merchandise and things like that. And my plan is to start creating these bench seats in the colour of green. Green was my mum's favourite colour. and have a plaque on them that says the missing matter, Marian matters, and they have a QR code on those, and put them in prominent spots. Like I've noted when doing this research that councils put memorial sites in cemeteries for the missing. And it's beautiful, it's got water features and all the rest of it, but no one is actually going to a cemetery and walking around looking at missing persons. We need to have it in a prominent space, like the top of Kangaroo Point Cliffs, for example, when people are sitting there looking out to the river. In my head, I want to be looking because I'm still looking for my mum. So I don't want to be going to a cemetery and sitting there with her memorial. The QR code, people will be able to scan it and it will take them to the website, The Missing Matter, and they can read stories about people who are missing in certain locations around the world. So I always start really big and bite off more than I can chew, and I chew like mad. But I have had to pull it back a little bit because we were doing a walk all over the world, and I had people in Scotland and New Zealand and Seattle and 3 places in the UK who are all going to do these amazing walks. And I just red taped again with, having to pay indemnity insurances and things like that. And it all got too difficult. So on Sunday, the 5th of October, we're just asking that everyone just dong on some green, go for a walk, take a photo of yourself, throw it over on our Facebook page with the hashtag The Missing Matter, and we'll just bring some awareness to the missing space. If people would like to try and get a ticket to Mum's Memorial High Tea that we're planning, it's going to be held on Sunday the 28th of September this year at Hamworth House here in Brisbane, and ticket information will be available via the website as well.
Beautiful. We'll pop a link to that in our show notes too. Sally, thank you so much for sharing your mum's story with us today and for taking us on this journey with you for the past near decade now. So we hope for your sake and for everyone who's been following this' sake and for anyone who has a missing person in their life that people at least get answers that go some way to healing that wound. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Claire, for having me.
Thank you to Sally for helping us tell her story. You can find a link to her podcast, The Missing Matter, and her website in the show notes. If you like this episode and want to hear more from guests like Sally, send us an email at truecrime@mamamia.com.au. And please, if you wouldn't mind, also leave us a rating and a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, just to let us know what you think of the show. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Claire Murphy, and produced by Tali Blackman, with audio designed by Jacob Round. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.